Hi, this is Jane with Green Side Up. Today we are going to talk about doing a vegetable garden, planting a garden that is going to give you food. Now we all know how much food has gone up in price, well, along with everything else. So there are some ways that you can actually save a little money. Back when I was a kid growing up in South Dakota, yes, South Dakota, not South Carolina, my dad had a huge garden. I mean, it was huge. He grew everything in that garden. And as kids, we would go out and, pick some of the produce. So we would go and pick the peas and the corn and the potatoes and the beans, and we'd eat them raw. Actually, we used to sit on the propane tank. My mother would yell at us, but we had so much fun on the propane tank, and it became our spaceship or our covered wagon or whatever, and we would eat the stuff out of the garden. I have great memories of gardens. Now, you can do a garden, and your kids can have great memories of the garden too. Today we're going to talk a little bit about how to do the soil for your garden, the things that you can grow, and when to harvest. The first thing you have to do to have a good, healthy garden is have some good soil. Now, here in Fayetteville, so often we have either clay or sand, and neither one of those is going to be real rich in nutrients. So you're going to want to add some nutrients to your garden. You're going to want to start with some good soils. There are garden soils available, there's manures, just some type of a combination to increase the nutrients in your soil. That is so important. Just like you would not build a house on a lousy foundation, so you don't want to do your garden on a lousy foundation, meaning bad soil. You want good, rich soil. Not everybody has space to do a regular garden. So there's a couple other options you can do. You can always do container gardens. I rent my house. I do a lot of container gardening. This is great, especially if you have, say like an apartment and you just don't have space to do a big garden. Another thing that people do for gardens is a straw bale garden. And again, I'm not going to go into that, but it is another option to a traditional garden. I'm kneeling here in a garden that has an assortment of different vegetables. So for instance, there's some broccoli, some cabbage, you probably can't see it right here, squash, and some tomatoes. Now, when you plant a garden, you don't necessarily plant everything at once. There are some crops that like to be planted early in the spring. So for instance, the broccoli and the cabbage. The broccoli has already been harvested. The tomatoes and your squash are hot weather crops. And if you planted them in like April, early in April, they're not going to be real happy because it's too cool. They need to have the soil warmed up. They need to have that nice warm sunshine. They will grow fast once you get them in, but you definitely don't want to put those in at the very beginning of your growing season. In the springtime at garden centers, you will find starter plants. That would be plants that have already been grown up a little bit. They've got a nice root system. They've not got nice greens to them. So you might wonder, should I go with a starter plant or should I go from seed? And you don't have to take my advice, but this is kind of how I do things. Things like a tomato, it takes a long time to grow them from seed. I don't have a place to grow them nicely. I will usually do a starter plant with a tomato or a pepper. Things like beans, definitely just buy a package of seeds. They come up quickly, they grow so nicely. I'm not sure how well they transplant anyway. You'll have to kind of play it by ear. It will also depend on what part of the country you live in. If you have long springs and summers, or if you like Minnesota where you're lucky to get your tomatoes in by Memorial Day and you're harvesting them, well, before frost, the beginning of September or something like that. So sometimes you just have to play it by ear. Do what your budget can handle and what you feel like doing. One of the questions I get from customers is, what should I do with fertilizing? Do I need to fertilize? How do I fertilize? We're going to say that you have started your garden with a good, nutritious base. Probably have put some compost and manure in there. That's going to get you started. Later on, there are some plants that really truly do need to be fertilized. For instance, a tomato is a big eater. It's a fast grower. It's going to want to have some kind of nutrients added throughout the season. There are fertilizers that are made especially for edibles. And so just go to a garden center, look on your shelf, and you'll be able to find some of those. If you need help, of course, ask for assistance. Another thing that you can do is composting. When I was a kid, remember my dad's big garden, we always were composting eggshells and rinds from melons and whatever it was. He'd always be going out there digging in his garden, and he had great gardens. So that is another option, just doing some natural composting. If you have further questions, there's of course a place at the bottom of this video that you can leave your questions. We're always happy to help you over at Green Side Up. Just come on in and we'll be glad to show you, well, whatever you might need to know about your gardening needs. This is Jane, and I hope that you will have happy gardening.